So when I look at high performance, or we talk about where does one team fit in an organisation, it's at the intersection of psychological safety and collective accountability. That's where you get high performance, because you only need to look at the neuroscience around learning. You do not learn in a safe environment.
Hey everyone, before we get into this week's podcast, we got a pretty cool announcement to make. You are now able to connect with us. We have a pretty cool little widget that's on the website. Just go to paultaylor.biz/podcast. And near the top of the page, you'll see a little icon that says send a message to the Paul Taylor podcast. So what we can do with that, you just click on that and then you send us an audio message and we will get the audio message. Now, the first thing I want to do with using it is actually do an Ask Me Anything episode. So all you got to do if you got a question that you want me to cover is just go to paultaylor.biz/podcast, hit on start the recording, and then send us a message about what you would like me to talk about in the Ask Me Anything, and leave your name. We will call it out on the show. I'll get that all put together. And the other thing you can do is just leave us a message about what you like about the podcast, what you don't like about the podcast. Did I talk too much? All of that sort of stuff. And just give us some feedback. And we will use that to continuously improve. So looking forward to hearing from you. Now, on with the podcast.
Graham Winter, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. Pleasure.
Now, we were just chatting before coming on. There's quite a lot of connections between us. My PhD supervisor, Eugene Aidman, you know very well. You also know John Crampton, Jeff Bond, who are, like yourself, kind of legends in the sports psychology movement in Australia. Just give our listeners a bit of a sense of your career, because it's pretty stellar and you've bounced back and forth between a couple of different domains, right?
I have, Paul. Started in the organisational psych area with what was then Coopers and Lybrand, a sort of precursor to PricewaterhouseCoopers. But I was also playing first-class cricket. And the then South Australian Institute of Sport were looking for a psychologist, and they wanted to recruit somebody that had been playing sport at an elite level. So I did that job for a few years, and then really just had the opportunity to combine those two passions of the organisational and the sports psych area. So I had the opportunity to sort of lead the sports psych group for 3 Olympics, worked with PricewaterhouseCoopers in their strategic change group, and more recently, last decade or so, I've had my own consulting business, Think One Team. So plus continuing to do a bit of work in the cricket area as well. So performance psychology is the thread that runs through it, mix of sport and business.
And just for our listeners, so back whenever you became a sports psychologist originally, there was no actual profession and no degree or qualification in sports psychologist back then, was there?
No, there were no courses or programs in Australia at all. So it was very much, for me, it was very much applying a lot of the organisational psychology lessons. And I think the approach that I took was probably worked quite well, because the setup when I was working with athletes was a lot about working with the coaches. And I think I've always felt that the approach I've wanted to take is to help the coaches to create the environment where the athletes are able to perform. And yes, there is still the individual work with the athletes as well. So probably separated my approach a bit, maybe from John and Jeff, for example, who were AIS for a while, Jeff for a long time, and then John was there, and also New South Wales Institute of Sport.
So when you were doing the Olympics, were you more in terms of the organisational stuff rather than the one-on-one with athletes?
First up, I was working quite a lot with the shooters, with a number of sort of individual sports. But for Sydney in particular, I remember at that particular point, I was really not doing much sports psychology work at all. And Herb Elliott was heading up athlete services and just contacted me and said, look, we just need someone to help to do the setup. We're going to have team about 970. And we need somebody to work with the managers, with the coaches, and to coordinate the psych area. And I remember having the conversation with Jeff saying, I feel like a bit of an imposter. He said, no, it's fine. There's enough sports psychs here to look at the athletes. Why don't you go and sort out a bit of the corporate intrigue? So, so that one felt a bit different to previous times where I was much more connected to the athletes, cycling and shooting and obviously sort of individuals that I knew from my own Institute of Sport as well.
So, mate, given that you've had a foot in both camps for a long period of time, both sport and org psych, what would you say are the main differences in terms of performance psychology in corporations versus performance psychology with athletes and sports teams? Does anything jumps to mind?
It's a great question. And I think in sport, you've also got to separate the individual sports from the team sports. I think if you move into, like I did some work with the Australian cricket team for a while, and I've worked with one of the AFL teams, and there's similarities to business there. Whereas I think the more you move into the individual sports, there's a difference. But I might sort of put a caveat on that in a moment. I mean, there's no question when you're working with Olympic level and so on that when they're talking high performance, they are talking high performance. It's world class, it's high standards, it's 100% commitment. You don't get that. To be blunt, you don't get that in many corporations. You might get it across a leadership group. You might get it across. I just spent the morning with a team that are working. They're quite a specialised team in the defence area. They're pretty committed to world class and standards and so on. But I think I'd probably say corporate's more complex. It's slower. It's a kind of slower burn, and often there's less clarity about what success may or may not mean. Obviously, if you're in sales areas and so on, or a project, it's clearer. But then having said that, for the individual, I think there's so many lessons that we can help business leaders who are now experiencing conditions that are more uncertain, they're more complex. They do need, I actually wrote a book in, 1991 or 92 called The Business Athlete. And I think that's now, in many ways, I've kind of looked, wow, that's really what we need to be helping a lot of people to do now is to treat themselves, because if you want to operate in a high demand environment, you've got to look after yourself. You've got to look after your teammates. And then you've got to be able to know what matters and focus on what you need to be able to do. And that applies in any high demand environment as well. So I think you can learn lots from each. And you can't bundle all the corporate stuff together either because every culture's got its uniqueness as well.
Interestingly, the Business Athlete, I reckon Jim Lower and Tony Schwartz actually probably stole that off you with their Corporate Athlete. Do you remember?
Yeah, I think that came later, but then Laura, I'm not quite sure my pronunciations might not be right, but he'd done Mental Toughness, I reckon, just before that, I think.
Interesting.
It was about 92, something like that, what's that, 32 years ago. But for me, that was really the sort of transition point of, in some respects, going, well, I've worked in business, now I've spent 6-7 years in the sport area full time, but I actually want to do both of them. And I had this fabulous sort of contract with PwC, who had a strategic change group. So I got to have this wonderful experience. I'm working with some of the top athletes and coaches in the world, in the Australian groups, while also working with people at the Singapore Prime Minister's office and large corporates around the world. So it was a kind of surreal experience. I mean, that was my university of learning about performance psychology. Because as you well know, there's the kind of science and the evidence, but you're also going into spaces that people haven't done the research on. So you've got to create your own learning environment in there and testing environment as well.
And do you find with athletes, particularly the individuals, that there is a pretty big ego with some of these guys? I mean, there has to be for the nature of it, right? To be right up there amongst the elite of the world, you've got to have a pretty big ego. And it is the psychology for those guys. Does it have to be different than teams and corporates?
It's an interesting one, the ego, isn't it? Because there's a level of self-belief, but then for many athletes underneath, one of their greatest drivers is the sense of
fear of failure.
A fear, that fear of not being good enough. It's some of those elements of perfectionism, which drive you to a certain point, but then there's a cost. It's a really tough one to generalize on. There's no question. You have to have a level of ego to be able to put yourself in that situation and back yourself and so on. But there's, and obviously you can maybe the expression, you can get away with it more in an individual environment. In a team environment, obviously you've got responsibilities to your teammates and you're having to kind of sometimes trade off, am I going to go for the basket versus pass it, etc. Whereas the individuals are much more and can be much more focused or much more selfish. In some respects need to be, because that level of autonomy, it's you. I mean, you're a tennis player, you're out there by yourself. And I think having played sport, that was one of the things I guess I was always very mindful of, was like, I might be trying to help this person, but I'm not the one going out in the middle there. I'm not was it Roosevelt, I think? Yeah, the one who's in the arena. Yeah, they're doing it. So they've got to find a way to do it. I mean, for some of the ways they do it have other costs. And as somebody said to me once, and it was so true, just because they're elite physically doesn't mean they're elite psychologically.
Yeah, good point.
So true.
And that's where the sports psychology comes in really, really strongly, doesn't it?
It does. And in some ways, the things that, I mean, this is where it kind of gets sort of challenging, because sometimes the stuff that will drive the outcome performance can also drive a level of self-destruction. So, what is that right balance between a level of obsessiveness that drives you to high standards versus a level of obsessiveness that causes you to do damage to yourself or to physically, mentally, or to relationships as well? And it's sort of abnormal psychology, because you when you're talking about the Olympics, you're talking about the best of the best, and that isn't normal. That's not average. You've got to find something out of the box. And I suppose we look at the sort of, I don't know, like the Roger Federers of this world and go, wow, isn't that just a wonderful model? But I've never seen people who don't have lots of self-doubts and lots of sort of inner demons and challenges. And for some of them, sport and proving themselves in sport is a way to deal with that. But sadly, for some, it doesn't actually ultimately prove that. Even winning an Olympic gold medal was still that sense of I'm not good enough, or what I do is not good enough, or wow, is that all it is? And I think it's an interesting challenge, and it does apply across the corporate area as well, about how do we personally define what success means for us, or the life that we want to live. And we're all learning that journey the whole way through.
There's got to be so many tightropes, right, at that elite level. And I think back to my time in the military as well. There's a tightrope with athletes around training and being optimally prepared, and then just tipping over into overtraining syndrome, right? That is so narrow, that line. And then with the psychology, as you said, that obsessiveness, but that tightrope to it going down into a horrible, horrible vortex, right? And the perfectionisms that's required. There's just got to be so many different tightropes that you've got to help them navigate as a psychologist.
Yeah, and a lot of that then, as you all know, goes to the quality of the support network that's around them, their coach, their colleagues, sometimes the medical team, the quality of the people that people put around them. That, I mean, tells you a bit about them, particularly if they have a level of choice in that, obviously. But I suppose the sort of thing that what we'll continually, whenever I work with a corporate group, one of the first things I'll ever take them through is we'll just have a look at what's the nature of the challenges you're facing. And then we'll sort of go, well, okay, so what extent are they technical challenges, linear challenges, where there's kind of there's a logical way to solve this problem. You're going to build a bridge. Fine. How do you build the bridge? Right. Well, there's a body of evidence, there's engineering and so on. But then you go, well, okay, that's how you build a bridge. But then let's assume you've got a community on one side and a community on the other, and they're having a fight with each other. How do you now solve that? That's not technical. That's adaptive. That's nonlinear. And therefore, you've got to develop an ability and a way to learn and experience your way through that. And I think for me, that's part of the sort of maturity. It's certainly the maturity you're trying to develop in athletes. And it's also the capability that you're trying to develop within leaders and teams in business to be able to deal with that balance of the technical and the adaptive, because they're completely different skill sets. One's about being disciplined and focused and checking it off and executing. The other one's about dealing with nuances and uncertainty and ambiguity and people's emotions. And there's no right answer. You got to make the answer right rather than kind of find the right answer. And that means you're then dealing with levels of frustration and so on. So to me, I guess what I'm always trying to do is help people to develop a kind of like a mindset, if you like, for how do I approach this? I mean, you listened to one of your podcasts recently talking about the sort of experience in the Antarctic. That sort of, there's lots of technical challenges there, but a lot of it's about learning your way through it, isn't it? And leaning into it. And it's that ability. And I think I learned that over time, that it's certainly in business. I often say, I'm not here to build a team. I'm here to help you how to learn, because your environment's going to constantly challenge and change for you. So how do we become fast learners who can then adapt as we move forward? And that's a hell of a mindset shift for someone who sees themselves as a subject matter expert that delivers, like some of the guys I had in the group this morning. I mean, they're some of the top engineers in defence in Australia. But their biggest challenges aren't technical. Their biggest challenges are adaptive, dealing with stakeholders and dealing with their teams and trying to get people to work across boundaries and deal with conflicting priorities and so on. And they all have a kind of cognitive load and a kind of emotional load that what you're trying to do, I guess, as a psych is to help them develop some skills and approaches to deal with it. But ultimately, you're trying to strengthen them. It's no different with physical training. You can help the person, but they got to learn through doing. That's always been my philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's now talk about team cultures, right? So you've written a best-selling book, Think One Team. What does it take for a team to truly operate as one? And how have those requirements, so a couple of parts of this question, how have those requirements evolved over time? But then how are those requirements different when you get into big organizations, which often have a matrix structure, where there is lots of competing agendas from different parts of the business, right? Because that starts to get tricky. So let's take the easy bit first. Like generally, what does it take to operate as one? And then about the changes over time. And then when we get into complex businesses.
Yeah, okay. Look, I'd go back to some of the work that Hackman did sort of 20 years ago in performance psychology around teamwork. And he coined these two phrases, mission cohesion and social cohesion. So if you think of sort of mission cohesion is, we're going up the mountain. We're going to get up there, summit, and get back successfully. So that's the mission. And then you kind of got the social cohesion at the level of trust and confidence and so on in each other. And I think that to some extent is the first thing to try and work out with a team. Do we have a mix of both? Because I think, like the group I was working with this morning, their social cohesion is actually going pretty well, but I think they're still kind of struggling a bit with what the mission is because it's complex and they have lots of different elements to it. So unlike a sports team that says, we want to win the premiership or we want a final at the Olympics, it's not as clear for them and things keep changing. Obviously can't go into detail, but things keep changing. So I'd start with that point. I think it's that point of, are we endeavoring to, because if it's social cohesion you're looking for, then you are still trying to create a sense of identity. Why are we here together? And the metaphor I was using right at the start of this morning session was, look, I actually went to a memorial service at a cricket club that I was part of earlier in the week. And I just said to them, let's reflecting back over 4 decades, the number of people that have invested in building that club and the things that they've done to build that club and its culture and its history and its resources and its artifacts and so on. So are you investing in this team? What is this identity? So I think that's almost the first thing is that sense of the team having its own identity. Then establishing that purpose. I always use a simple model. I wrote a book called High Performance Leadership almost 20 years ago now. Came out of the back end of the Sydney Olympics and the work with PwC. And PwC had done a series of, or helped us to do and coordinated a series of interviews and sort of evidence gathering across a vast range of different types of organisations, but the majority of them were organisations that operated in small, fast teams. So special military, emergency medicine, first responders, some business areas and so on. And we were trying to look at what is it that seems to enable you to create that environment where you don't just have one team, but you can form teams and teams can come together and they can go and execute things. And we land, I won't go through the more detailed model, but the simplest thing that I could come up with was align, collaborate, learn. Because when I looked at every one of those teams, and I apologize to anybody who's ever had a knee reconstruction, but the letters are ACL, which are very unfortunate, given that many of my clients know exactly what an ACL is. It's the last thing you need. But if you think of any team you've worked with, there's an alignment, there's a collaboration, there's a learning, and if you put that into a loop, then you've got to spin that loop at the speed of relevance. So remember when we do some work with Fire and Rescue New South Wales, and they're looking at that going, we got 3 of them. We got like a big slow loop, which is like our whole strategic planning loop. Then we've kind of got a more kind of operational type loop that you could sort of go, we align, we collaborate, we learn, and we do that. We do that weekly, we do it monthly, in a variety of ways we communicate, the way we measure success, the projects we work on and so on. And then when there's a fire, we're spinning that align, collaborate, learn loop, and every moment. So the defense guys call it the speed of relevance. So I think part of the broader answer to that is, what do you need in your environment for alignment, for collaboration, and for learning. And if you unpack each of those, alignment's not just, we know what the goal is. No. We need to be committed. Exactly. I'm bringing your words back to you. But, as you said, when you're tied together with these other people, it's a we, not me. So alignment's a commitment. Collaboration to me is sharing. Collaboration is sharing resources, ideas, information, and so on. And then learning is your ability to adapt. So whenever I'm working with a team, I always use that align, collaborate, learn, and I'll often introduce it with a bit of a story around one that we put in the book, Toolkit for Turbulence, around a Qantas pilot, Kevin Sullivan, talking about his experience of Qantas's, one of their two major incidents when a flight from Singapore to Perth went into a dive back in 2008, 2009, I think. And, he sort of recounts the pilot's metaphor, the pilot's mental model: aviate, navigate, communicate. Aviate, there's no runway underneath you, keep the plane in the air. Navigate, it's not staying up here forever. We've got to get it down, find somewhere to land. Communicate. You're going to need resources and support when you get there. So to me, that's the mental model. And I guess when I'm working with people in these high demand environments, you try to give them these simple mental models, scaffolding, if you like, that they can then use. So when I'm working with a team, it's align, collaborate, learn. And then I think that final question you asked about the complexity of the environment, it's then the ability to say, well, okay, I think the evidence shows us that the best way to get teams to collaborate with each other is to have them confident in their own identity and their own confidence, and then find a superordinate goal. So what you're trying to do is find a way of getting them to align and collaborate and learn. What's the reason behind that? So, but my sense is always under pressure, the last thing you learn, first thing you forget. So I'm always just hammering teams I'm working with. Are we aligned? Are we collaborating? Are we learning? How do we know? How are we going to get better at that? What does collaborate mean if you're in a business context? Solving problems together, partnering more effectively, sharing resources. What does learn mean? Okay, well, we're learning about the task, but what about the dynamics? So I'd encourage your listeners just to think align, collaborate, learn, and what's the cadence of that? Which is really back to quality management, Deming, plan, do, check, adapt, or even like the basic scientific model. It's a learning model. That's what you need in an adaptive environment.
I want to pick up on, you talked about Hackman and the idea about mission and social cohesion. And when you said that, a conversation just popped into my head. I interviewed a guy called Lee Ellis a number of years ago who spent 5.5 years in the Hanoi Hilton prison camp in Vietnam. I don't know if you're familiar with the story around that, but these guys were in there and they were brutally tortured and they were in solitary confinement. And the leader in there, Jim Stockdale, he actually spent 7.5 years in that prison camp, 4 years in solitary confinement and 2 years in leg irons. But Lee said to me, he was very, very big on a twin focus of mission and people. And it was just always mission and people, mission and people, mission and people, right? Being totally united behind the mission, but this whole idea of that social cohesion. And Lee told me they created this thing called the TAP code when they found out that they were going to be put in solitary, which was a way that they could tap out the letters of the alphabet and communicate with each other. And Lee said that was the glue that held these guys together, that got them through those ridiculous amounts of torture, was that social connection, right? And it kind of strikes me that it's actually a good sort of overview for people in their own life, right? Mission and social cohesion, right? What's your purpose? But people, social connections, social cohesion, relationships, those sorts of things. So we can really generalize that high performance stuff, not just from business and sport, but to individuals in their own personal life as well, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think, one of the phrases I use a lot is people first, task close behind.
Nice. I like it.
What I assume is that we know what the mission is. But if we do, because then, so many of the people I work with, particularly in the corporate area, they'll tend to go task first, people second, or task first, people when you got time.
And probably more in certain industries, right?
Yes.
So ones that are very competitive, like banking and those sorts of things,
Definitely.
Very much task focused generally.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it causes people that, but it's that ability to get them to pause for a minute and go, hang on a minute, like think about the tone by which you start the meeting, etc. So exactly, I think, but yeah, the Stockdale paradox. that sort of that sort of ability to, well, that was the stuff that became the confront the brutal facts, which
Yes,
was
that's
in
right.
all of
Yeah.
scholars is good and great. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I think,
Retain the faith that you prevail in the end, and at
yeah,
the same
yeah.
time confront
And then,
those brutal facts of your reality.
yeah, suck it up for today. That's what you're just going to have to deal with. And yeah, it's that pragmatic approach versus over optimism or overly pessimistic. Yeah.
The
But
old
yeah,
she'll be right, mate, does not fly in times of difficulties.
no, it's narrow the focus, but know why. Yeah.
Now, let's move on. One of the big reasons I got, the thing that caught my eye was you talking about psychological safety in a very similar way that I've been thinking about it. So you have rather provocatively suggested that even though psychological safety is essential, and I think we would all agree that it is too often now becoming an excuse for mediocrity. And I would add on to that, people are using it as an excuse not to be held to account, right? So what do you mean by it's becoming an excuse for mediocrity?
Look, I guess that it probably starts with the unfortunate naming that psychological safety is badly named. And I don't blame Amy Edmondson or anyone for that. But what we've got at the moment is this confusion between psychosocial safety, which is the environment in which you feel you're not going to be bullied, you're not going to be harassed, etc. But the research, the experience around psychological safety, it's done in a team environment. So I think that's the first thing. It's about teamwork. And the second thing is the research, again, on psych safety very clearly defines it as that ability to, in a sense, to be yourself and to be able to express yourself. And I talk to, first responders, for example, and say, well, gee, you couldn't have psych safety if you're in a fire environment. And they'll turn around and say, are you kidding? That's exactly what you need. And then when you unpack that, you see that for them, psychological safety is anybody can call out at any moment any level of risk or concern or whatever, because you can speak up, because you know that you've got to be at your best to create the environment for yourself and your mates. But on the other hand, the bit that's missing is collective accountability. So to me, they're two circles that fit together. So when I look at high performance, or we talk about where does one team fit in an organization, it's at the intersection of psychological safety, the proper definition, and collective accountability. That's where you get high performance, because you don't need to look at the neuroscience around learning. You do not learn in a safe environment. You learn in a kind of roller coaster process of, I feel like, Paul's created an environment where I feel like I can have a go, I can test myself, I can push myself to the limits, and I want to do that because I reckon we can do something really special here. So it's that ability to put those two together. And my concern with the mediocrity is that, and I've seen it, I reckon probably my first 4 or 5 conversations with chief executives at the start of this year were, what the hell do we do with this thing called psychological safety? My ops managers, my operations leaders are scared witless to have a conversation. My HR people want to run training courses on psych safety. I don't disagree that we want to look after our people, but we've got stuff to deliver here, and I don't know how to do it. So what we've been doing very strongly for the last sort of 6-9 months is getting groups together and very simply just saying, if you're in an environment where you feel confident and fearless and bold, tell me about that environment. And then we say, now, tell me about the environment if you feel like you're empowered and you're accountable to do really good things. Now let's put those two together. What is that environment? Because that's the environment. So my concern is that it's for a whole host of reasons, some being the sense of I don't want to speak up about it, and others kind of comfortable, that they're sitting behind the mediocrity. And I've found 99.9% of responses I've had to articles and a variety of other things have been people saying, thank goodness we're actually defining what this thing is rather than what people have sort of wanted it to become.
Yes, and I think there are a small, we know that in any business, in any team, there is a small amount of malingerers, right, who will grab onto anything to protect them from being held to account. And I think psychological safety is their new beacon that they reach for.
Yeah, and I think if I add to that, it's also a sense of we can't make our employees uncomfortable.
Jesus, I'm going to run a business.
I continue to, but the challenge for you as a leader is people will happily go into uncertain, uncomfortable, challenging environments if they feel they have a choice. and that they feel that they have a level of safety net or support. That's your role as a leader, not to protect them and keep them out of it. That's the worst. That's over-parenting. I watched my little grandson going, okay, I really don't want him to bust too many bones, so I'm there sort of catching him, but he's got to fall a bit.
And he's got to climb a bloody tree, right?
Exactly.
And learn.
And the beauty of it is he does that, and then I watch my little granddaughter, and she's going up even faster. And you go, okay, I do need to put a little safety net around that. That to me, it's that wonderful opportunity. I always say to leaders, you got two roles. You've got to unlock potential and you've got to unblock. And if you put in these fake views of what safety is, you're just putting in blockages. You're blocking people's potential. You're not doing them any favors. Exactly the same as with kids. You want to build their level of resilience. You don't learn resilience in a course.
That's right.
You just don't. I mean, you'll comment, I've heard you say it a number of times in your podcast. There is massive mental training in the gym. Of course there is.
Yeah.
What you're training for, your ability to set a goal, hold the tension, hold your shape when you're under pressure. I mean, because it's what you want to do, isn't it? You want to hold your shape physically, emotionally, because that's what we need people to be able to do. And yeah.
Yeah, no, mate, I love everything you said about it. And it actually made me reflect back on my time when I was in the military, and particularly when I did helicopter search and rescue in the mountains and islands of Scotland, which is friggin' dangerous game, right? We had something called the tabs off rule, where anything to do with safety, even an air crewman who was a leading hand could call out the most senior officer about anything to do with safety, right? So that, to me, was psychological safety, but it didn't mean that you couldn't be held to account. And it didn't mean that you couldn't take orders and things like that, right? I think it's being very diluted, as is many of the things today, like the word trauma has been massively diluted to the point where I'm hearing teenagers talking about their trauma of a breakup. It's like, exactly. When you look at the DSM definition of original one of trauma, it's about fear of your life or someone very close to you. But now that's being diluted, and this whole safety thing is being diluted massively. And I think, to your point, we are mollycoddling individuals left, right, and center and within organizations. And it's becoming really hard to get shit done.
You are echoing what I'm hearing constantly. You know, I've never heard chief executives and senior leaders be more pessimistic about the environment in which they're trying to operate at the moment. They just feel from a governance perspective, you know, since the Banking Royal Commission, there's just so much governance pressure, but you've got all of that social pressure as well. And even back to your point a moment ago, I got asked that I was just speaking at a lunch recently, and somebody said to me, I think it was my daughter has just missed out on this and they're feeling really depressed or something and whatever. And I sort of stopped them for a moment and said, look, I've done some clinical psych work over the years, and I've seen sad and I've seen depressed. And when I see depressed, I desperately want to give the child my mobile phone number because I'm genuinely scared and worried about them. When I see sad, I just want to make sure that I keep the lines of communication open, but they need to learn to deal with sad. And we're not allowing people to do that. There's a range of human emotions for a reason. And we're over-coddling, exactly as you
I think we are pathologizing feelings is kind of how I would set that up. You know, what used to be called nervous is now anxiety, and what used to be called sad is now depression. Anyway, don't get me started on that one. But let's return to the psych safety. So how give some people some tips about, because there'll be lots of corporates listening to this podcast, you know, from people who I've worked with before. How do you create a culture where people do feel safe to speak up, but still they're held to account?
Yeah. Look, I start with conversations. Well, it's the leaders got a lot of model it, but we have this simple 3-point tip process that we start to try and embed with any leadership group, and we start on the psych safety accountability bit. We say, here's your 3 things. Number 1, set the tone. So set the tone in your emails, set the tone in your meetings, set the tone in any sort of exchange, a one-on-one, a debrief or whatever. And that tone is a mix of people. Well, to me, it's people first, task close behind. So we're here for a reason. Second habit is invite participation. Make sure everybody's in. Make sure they're participating. You're getting views from them, not just run by the extroverts. And then the third one is facilitate constructively. So take people towards a solution or take them towards a goal. And that's bringing both of those together. So we always start with that. We take I've got a group I'm starting with a group and a police group next week. And that's exactly what we'll be asking them to do. And we'll catch up with them every couple of weeks and we'll debrief it. But it'll be, what's the tone we want to set? How do we do that? And then we'll be getting some feedback. So then the second thing I think leaders can do is, and it's hard for leaders to get feedback, but it's asking insights. It's saying, yeah, Paul, I reckon I've done okay, but what's one thing you reckon it would be even better if? What would make this an even more open experience for us? So what would make this more impactful for your listeners? So it's getting everybody to go, oh, wow, my leader's open to, there's a vulnerability there. There's an openness to learn. That's meant. And then the third one is debriefing. As a sort of senior SAS person said to me, it's always stuck in my head, relentless and intensive debriefing. Now, maybe it's not always relentless and intensive debriefing, but if you want accountability, you got to pause. And maybe it's a really good point to make as we sort of head towards sort of closure, that when we did that research around align, collaborate, learn, the one thing that hit me and it really sort of hit me in the face, but it took a while for us to see it, was special military, emergency medicine, sport, etc. All of those environments have a natural pause. They have a pause between mission, between incident, between start of event, finish event, half times and whatever. They have a natural inbuilt point where they can learn. So they align, game plan, collaborate, get out and play, learn what's worked, what hasn't worked, how do we move forward. There is no natural pauses unless you're running a project or an agile process where you've got good retrospective. So I think the other thing is to build the cadence. So I'd really hone in on that. So, three things. Focus on the conversations, setting the tone, invite participation, facilitate constructively, and then take that into being the person that people see wanting to learn and being vulnerable and open to learn. And then that third piece, we're in the debrief.
I absolutely love that. There's a few things, because I run some high performance team sessions as well. And, taking some stuff from the military, I remember always being told you can never over communicate clarity. Right?
Yeah.
That one there. And then the invite participation, I often talk to teams about in meetings, just start off with using a talking stick, where you put the agenda on the table and the talking stick goes around the table, because you said exactly the same thing. Meetings are often dominated by extroverts, right? People like me who actually think while they're talking, right? And us extroverts talk a lot of horse shit sometimes, right? Because we're formulating our thoughts while
that's right. We don't believe it. We just
that's right. And the introverts take a bit more time, and I'm kind of generalizing it, but takes more time to formulate their thoughts. And they often get shut down in meetings or don't get a chance to participate. And that's why I love that talking stick. And particularly if you get an agenda item, a quick round the table, right? Give a comment. You could say no comment on this and pass it on. But what happens then is you get a whole heap of different opinions before you start the debate, rather than the dominant people just taking over. I think that's key. And then I think I'll comment on your last one around debriefing. I never flew a single sortie where I didn't have a debrief afterwards. And I think it's something that is massively missing in business, is around debriefing. And particularly the other thing, I think from my time in the aircrew world, is about learning from others' mistakes. So as an aircraft captain, I could not sign out that aircraft until I had read and signed all aircraft incidents that had happened, right? And the whole idea was aircrew didn't live very long at the start of it. I remember Nigel Hennell, an old crusty instructor, telling us when he first graduated, they sailed an aircraft carrier from Singapore all the way to the Far East, Thailand or somewhere like that. He said by the time they got there, half of all the aircrew were dead, right? Because flying helicopters off ships, very dangerous business, particularly back in those days. So that's when that culture started about learning from other people's mistakes. And I find, and you'll have seen this, you've been at conference before, I'm sure, where people stand up there and they talk about best practice, right? And here was a really great example of things going really well, rah, rah, rah. I'm like, who's talking about the fuck ups? Who's getting up there and saying, Here's where this went massively wrong. Here's the learning lessons from all of this for everybody to share. So yeah, man, I'm completely aligned with everything you said there. One question, that senior SAS guy, first name wasn't Harry or Reg, was it?
Oh, God, it's going back 20 years ago, but no, I don't think it was.
No. Okay. I was just, I know a couple of guys, a mate of mine, Reg Crawford and a Harry Moffat, who...
No, it wasn't. Yeah, just know of Harry quite well.
Some of our circles had crossed. Now, we are running a little bit out of time, but I do want to talk about performance under pressure, right? Because you've had a wealth of experience working with both individuals and teams in that high performance stuff, both in elite sport and in business. So give us a few tips about that sustainable peak performance, right? Because everybody can be a peak performer for a while, but you and me will have seen plenty of them burn out, right? What can some people do to maintain that performance, sustainable peak performance without actually burning out?
I think,
and if you could solve this, you'll be a multimillionaire.
Yeah. I mean, I'll probably take the word peak out. So I think it's sustainable performance. And then at certain points, you need to peak for an event, presentation or whatever. The framework I came up with, I don't know, about 12, 14 years ago now. And we went and looked back on some of the research on burnout. And we're actually engaged by a reasonably large organization. They had quite a good culture, but their issue was their performance management system. They said, it sucks. It's just ridiculous. It's just a ticker box exercise. And they said, we want to turn our, like we just talked about a moment ago, we want to turn our performance cycle into something where people genuinely learn and grow and we get better. Can you see whether you can do something about it? So we just went back to square one and said, all right, well, if you're trying to design a performance system, what is your definition of performance? And we settled on 4 elements that have stuck for the last 12 years. And we've embedded this in, I don't know, got half a dozen of Australia's universities and some of the banks and a variety of other places. The acronym is ADEP, Achieve, Develop, Enjoy, Partner. So you stop and reflect for a moment. I'm betting the best parts of your career, Paul, are times when you are achieving meaningful outcomes, you were developing and growing, you were enjoying, so there was lots of energy in, and you had strong partnering and collegiate relationships with each other.
Absolutely.
That's your high-performance environment. So to me, that's your starting point. So pretty much there's not too many people that escape me if I'm working with them, coaching them and so on. We just use that ADEP framework. We set it up in 90-day cadence, and it's what does achievement look like for you in this next 90 days? What does development look like? What does enjoyment and energy look like? Tended to use energy more with the more senior people because they'll kind of get the energy in, energy out. And then partnering, critical partnering relationships. Then we debrief it. We'll do a check-in every 30 days. How are you going? And we do a proper debrief and a reset. And it's a good one that you can then go, I don't expect in any 90 days that you're going to have each one of those 4 in balance. But if one of those is depleted, over time, it's going to start to have an impact. If the energy isn't there, clearly we're going to run out of gas. We're going to lose our creativity. If our development's not there, then we're going to stagnate. If the partnering relationship's there, we're going to start to get too isolated. Obviously, the achievement's the one that tends to be there. So I think that would be my very strong recommendation to people. Think about performance in those 4 elements: achieve, develop, enjoy, partner. Put it into something like a 90-day cadence, and I think you'll find that can have quite a significant impact. And we use it a lot with getting leaders to coach their teams as well. It's a great little debrief for the team. Do an ADEP debrief for the last 90 days. What did we achieve? What did we develop, etc. A couple of things where we didn't quite get there in each of those areas. Where next? And you can build that cadence, and that's the alignment that then builds the collaboration and the learning.
Man, I love it. Love it. Awesome stuff. Man, I've loved everything about this conversation. It's been awesome. Where can we send people if they want to read your books? You got a number of different books, but also if there's corporates here who want to book in to come in and do some work with their teams, where's the best place to go?
Easiest place to find me is either Graham Winter on LinkedIn or thinkoneteam.com. But thinkoneteam.com has got all of the sort of connections to books and so on. That's also got connection. My most recent book, Toolkit for Turbulence, that's co-authored with Martin Bean. So Martin's the Vice Chancellor at RMIT for 5 or 6 years. So we wrote that alongside a bunch of other sort of chief executives from around the country looking at operating in high turbulence environments. Kevin Sullivan, the Qantas pilot, one of those. So, but they can sort of access resources there as well.
Yeah, cool. last question. What's next, or what are you excited about?
I'm trying to work out whether I'm going to wing foil, and this has got nothing to do with with career. I've just got to the point where I'm just about to work out how to get the wing foil to work, and this is a completely different experience. So
what
physically,
wing foil? What's this?
Well, you get a wing, like a 4 to 5 to 6 meter blow up wing, and then a board with a foil on the bottom. And you put the two together with water and wind, and I've got it going, but I just think it's the coolest thing. So that's for that. And then the other stuff is I love what I do. I enjoy the stuff with clients. I don't see that that sort of shifting. I think as a good mate of mine said, who I played cricket with years ago, mate, I fear retirement more than death. I fear retirement more than death.
Yeah, it is a very quick way to massively accelerate your cognitive decline is to retire. Exactly. So keep doing what you're doing, mate. Awesome stuff.
Yeah. Look, thanks, Paul. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I love your work. I love the way you combine the physical, the psychological, and the practical together. So kudos. I think you're doing a great job.
Thanks, Graham. Cheers.